Welcome to Founder Stories with Galen Data. My name is Chris DuPont, CEO and co-founder of Galen Data, the leading cloud platform for connected medical devices. Every company founder has a story to tell, and this series is about sharing those stories. Joining me today is Reese Terry, founder of Cyberonics. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights on how you started Cyberonics.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be here today.
I'm excited. And full disclosure, we're going to take a little different path today than I normally do with these founder series. Reese was my boss. I worked for Cyberonics for 9 years before commercial sales. And I wanted to give a little background on Reese and Cyberonics. Reese has a master's degree in electrical engineering, an honorary PhD in engineering. His background is pacemakers, cordis, and intermedics. Reese patented the first wireless pacemaker communication, the first programmable pacemaker, the first integrated circuit for digital pacemakers, about the same time the digital watch was released, and about a year before common cell phones was demonstrated. Reese was the chairman of Cyberonics, chairman of the board. He was a board member. He was VP of engineering. That's when he was my boss. Reese was the original CEO and twice interim CEO. And it's not unusual when you work for a startup to have multiple roles such as Reese did. And Cyberonics brought to market an FDA Class 3 device, an implantable device, fully implantable, a PMA device, one of the most difficult devices you can bring to market. It's the first time a device was used to treat epilepsy. One of the original devices, or first devices for neurological disorders, and Cyberonics, their device was approved both for epilepsy and depression. And Reese has been through two exits with the same company. Cyberonics originally IPO'd in 1993. It was planned to be sold to St. Jude in 1996, but as it happens with startups sometimes, St. Jude decided to buy another company. And then Medtronic made an offer on Cyberonics. Cyberonics countered, and Medtronic withdrew an offer. And I know when I was there, Reese, there was at least one other offer that was made for Cyberonics. And then later, Cyberonics and the Soren Group merged and created Livanova in 2015. Reese, did I get most of that right?
Yes, Chris, that was a good summary.
Awesome. And it's often when you look back in life, in my opportunity to work for you and Cyberonics in Houston, having an implantable device was truly unique and unusual experience. It's not common to have that experience. My background is also electrical engineering, so Reese and I can have some shared experiences there. And the very first question, Reese, where did the idea for VNS stimulation originate?
Well, this idea was brought to us when I was VP of Technology for Intramedics. But it was brought to me by Dr. Jacob Zabara, who is a physiologist from Temple University. And he had come up with this idea and done a number of dog experiments himself to prove that vagus stimulation would interrupt seizures. Now, he did this himself, and he hadn't published any papers. So we talked to some other doctors about it, and they suggested we go do some additional studies with Dr. Joan Lockhart at University of Seattle, or the University of Washington in Seattle. Well, the company didn't really have enough money to fund it at that time, but they did. And so we did these studies in monkeys where we induced seizures. We actually reduced chronic epilepsy in the monkeys, and the device would detect a seizure and start stimulation, just like we did in the dogs, except the dogs were acute. And lo and behold, we didn't interrupt seizures, but the seizures stopped coming. So wow, and the investigator was really amazed at this. So that's kind of how the idea started. Dr. Zabara had accumulated quite a library of published papers that would support the basic scientific basis for vagus stimulation to treat epilepsy. But nobody knew about it. And when we first presented it to doctors at the American Epilepsy Society, they all poo-pooed it. They said, we don't want to have anything to do with this. But we had a breakfast meeting with Dr. Penry, who is the leading epileptologist and former head of NIH epilepsy branch. He understood the need for additional therapies in epilepsy. Over 30% are not treated. Are treated but still have seizures. And there are only a few drugs available at that time. So Dr. Penry said, I will help you with this. I think there's something there. It needs to be investigated. We need some more studies, but I'll help you.
That's amazing. I don't think I've ever shared this story with you, Reese, is that I was in Oklahoma City representing Cyberonics at some event, and I met a doctor, early Cyberonics, and he said, Chris, he goes, in all my formal training, VNS stimulation for epilepsy shouldn't work. But he goes, I see it work in my patients. I know it works. And it was so revolutionary at the time, so far outside the box that formal training, formal education said that this shouldn't work. But he saw it in his patients and he became a believer. And with multiple stories like that throughout the history of Cyberonics, where you hear those stories from patients and physicians.
Okay, Chris, from my standpoint as electrical engineer, it made ultimate sense to me, because what is epilepsy? It's a imbalance, electrical imbalance in the brain, where it goes into basically oscillation, positive feedback. Okay, if we can send a signal there that dampens that out, well, that should work, and that's what we're doing. So from an electrical engineering standpoint, it makes sense.
I'm there with you.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. So now the idea is there, VNS stimulation. You have some clinical studies to support it. How do you go from having that idea to actually starting a corporation, starting Cyberonics?
Well, the first thing that came up was, it was sort of disaster, but blessing in disguise. I was moved out of Intermedics. We had a new CEO. They had a budgeting problem. They needed to fix that quickly, and they got rid of several executives. I was vice president of quality, so good riddance there. So that gave me a lot of time to think about this and try to think of what I could do. And so I said, well, I'm going to try to raise some money for this, because we know that it works in dogs anyway, because we had done dogs studies at Intermedics, actually, in the lab, and I saw it stop the seizures. I was convinced. Well, I didn't know anything about writing a business plan. I bought a book from Rice, followed that, and at this time, we didn't have much as far as word processors and things. I used some sort of a program and wrote this business plan. It turned out to be quite a lengthy document, and included a lot of the scientific basis for, papers involved in that. And then I started going around and talking to investors. And the first investor I talked to was Bill Mullaney, who was just starting a VC firm here in Houston. He'd come out of the Baylor College of Medicine VC firm. Well, Bill had been formerly vice president of international marketing at Medtronic. So he kind of knew the technology. And then I went to other investors and ended up with talking to Seven Rosen Bayless, who was one of the leading technology investors at that time. They were out of Dallas, but they were involved in Apple and a number of the major startup companies. They were interested. And another company that actually was an investor in Bill Mullaney's fund was Vista. And so all of a sudden we had 3 investors. So it started, I made the first contact with Bill Mullaney in July. We had a tentative agreement in October and a formal term sheet in December.
It's amazing.
And that was, I had left Intermedics in December, had the funding the next December, 12 months.
It's amazing.
So it was amazing.
And totally amazing. And electrical engineer, had all the experience from medical device, regulatory, you had the science, you understood it, you believed in the science. Now you had to figure out how to wrap a corporation and go raise money. And you did it. You absolutely did it. And you got a book from Rice. I love that. I remember you telling me stories in the early days of Cyberonics. You used to have business meetings at Dairy Queen in League City or Webster. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. After we got the funding and got the company started, I was looking around a place to house the company. And my friend Steve Weinberg had a little company in League in League City, and he said, "Why don't you come here and work with me, and we share the space." It was a little dinky shopping center, and so we did that. Well, there was not a lot of room, and for the first, we didn't have a lot of people either, but there was no privacy in this. We had one bathroom, and we shared.
I know that. Right?
And so, fortunately, there was a Dairy Queen next door. And a lot of times we would just go over there and have meetings and get away from everybody else and talk or just socialize and things. So that was our extended conference room.
I love that. You hear stories of entrepreneurs starting their business in a garage. You did some of your startup in a Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
Amazing. I remember that, and I never forgot you sharing that with me. What a story. You touched a little bit on your fundraising. I know you IPO'd. So can you maybe speak a little bit to the early challenges of fundraising?
Well, like I said, we were lucky to get the first round of financing with these three investors. And very lucky that they were really good guidance, not only the money, but the guidance these investors gave us. Bill Mullaney from the medical standpoint, medical device standpoint. Another investor in this was Skip Cummins from Vista, and Skip was really good on raising money and pushing us to get money before we really needed it. And that's one of the keys to starting a startup, is getting the money, setting milestones that show progress and tying fundraising to that. And he was really good at doing that and bringing other investors in. And that's the advantage of a good investor network that know other investors. Because once they get their money in, they want to get other people in. They don't want to put all their money in. So
yeah, I often think of Cyberonics in my own simple view as a stool with three legs: the entrepreneur, the engineer, the scientist. You had that background. You had Dr. Zabar that came from the pure science, and then you had the funding side. Those three main segments, engineering, entrepreneurship, the science, and the funding. That's true with any company. I think you need those three elements in different formats, but those three elements to get a company started and make it successful.
Yeah. Well, the other key to this, or probably one of the most important keys, was Dr. Penry, who'd come on really early, said, "I will help you." As we got started, he started a scientific and medical advisory board, helped us design the clinical studies, brought other people involved in it, some more independent animal study investigators. So he was the really key, both to bringing the money in, because we said, look, we've got the top guy in the world working with us. So it's very important to have good advisors, outside advisors, particularly in medical business, to have a good medical advisory board. So later, back to the question of this, later on, we always said, do we want to merge with somebody? We talked to other people like Medtronic, never got any place with that. And we had an opportunity at one time to go public. Well, we didn't have PMA approval then. And most people said, no, you can't do it. But there seemed to be a window opening that we could try to go public. Skip was really pushing this. And we did this. We had a roadshow, and we're actually able to go public.
Wow.
And this, again, the timing is so important, because just a few weeks later, I think there was a move to revamp the healthcare system by Hillary Clinton, and the whole window of IPO shut down in medical devices for a good while. And so we got that, we were in that window. Another local Houston medical company didn't make it. They were starting, but the window shut before they did. So timing is everything on this. And that's
timing is everything.
To hit that time.
A great observation there. And you don't always control the timing, so be ready when those windows open. Makes total sense. The other thing that always fascinated me about Cyberonics is this is a brand new market. It's the first time a device was used to treat epilepsy. There was no market for a device to treat epilepsy. There was no reimbursement codes. There was nothing, no market, no anything. You had to create everything from scratch. What was that experience like?
Well, the first thing is to sort of convince the market that this works, that this is a viable therapy. And so we did a 10-patient pilot study. We had a big meeting at the AES meeting in Boston, I can remember. There were like 200 people there at 7 o'clock in the morning to hear our story. And then we did a double-blind study, an additional double-blind study. So we had 2 double-blind studies, which had never been done in the medical devices. First company to ever do a double-blind study. And then we got FDA approval. But there was still a lot of skepticism out there. So to build a market from that, of course, we had our original investigators, the ones that had been involved in the clinical studies, and just we had a large scientific medical advisory board meeting after the approval to tell the story to more potential investigators and kind of move from there.
Wow, amazing!
But it was working with challenge convincing these doctors, and there were many skeptics out there, and there's still
there's still skeptics. But that I want to share one other life experience that you created for me, Reese. Is Reese would bring in patients with epilepsy and depression that our device was helping, and these patients, one personally told me that this device literally saved his life. And then epilepsy you can see, depression you can't, and to know that I was part of a team, Reese. You allowed me to be part of a software team that helped these patients, and I was one of many, and I was nobody in the company. But I mean, you get all the credit for bringing this technology, but it takes a team of engineers and marketers. Don't forget marketing; they're very, very important. And so, based on that experience, I made the decision to stay in the medical device industry, and that's because of you, because of the therapy, and because of the patients that came in. Life-changing event for me, and I've seen it. I know it works. I've seen it help patients, and it's just an amazing, amazing device. Then that kind of leads us to a question: is can you share the highs and lows of starting Cyberonics?
Well, the first high, of course, was getting that first funding. Here we are. I got the first funding in December, $1 million valuation for the company. Wow. Maybe I could take that money and run away. But,
right.
Okay. So that was a big high. Look, I'm an engineer. I'd never done this. I'd never done any of this before.
Right. So, to that.
So that was exciting. And then we were able to develop the device in 1 year and make the implant. We applied for IDE approval and IRB approval in September. We got both approvals in 3 weeks. That's unheard of.
Amazing.
That was way before we were ready to start. So we had our first patient implanted in November, and we had gone on a vacation to skiing. Dr. Penry calls me up right before Christmas, says this patient is responding. He got 80% of his seizures have stopped. He had 2 types of seizures. One were completely gone away. He still had some of the others, but no side effects. He says, this is amazing. That was right before Christmas. And that was, so that was just 2 years after I had left Intermedics.
Wow.
Then he had another patient. He said, I've got this other patient. Has a seizure every day. No, a seizure every hour. He has 24 seizures a day on average. This guy he's so bad. You don't want to try him, but we ended up implanting him in February, I believe. And lo and behold, this patient almost completely stopped having.
Wow.
So in a few months, 2 or 3 months, he was completely seizure free. And the guy was seizure free as far as years and years later. So the first 2 patients were home runs. That's amazing. looking back, we thought, well, that's amazing. That's great. Well, it's never happened before. I mean, never happened since that time.
Mhm.
So that was like a miracle that we had two great successes right there. If we'd had two failures, three failures in a row, which could have happened, we might not have beat that.
Yep.
That might have shut the program down. We don't know. And of course, we didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
So that was the big. Those are the highs. Well, start about the lows. Well, when we did these first few patients, it turned out we had some wire problems. The wires broke. Well, I had gone to the NIH. I had asked them what electrode to use. They said, use this electrode. We've used it in our safety studies. They're made by Huntington Medical Research Institute. We use those electrodes. Well, the wires broke. They may have lasted for the short time for the animal studies for NIH, but they didn't last in humans. I didn't think you would have much movement in the neck, but I guess you do. So I had to quickly redesign that lead using sort of pacemaker technology on making leads. So we did that and kept going. Fortunately, the doctor stayed with us, even though we had to explant and reimplant several leads. So that was the first big challenge. It wasn't so much a down. It was like I got to get this fixed real quick. And we did. The next big, I guess the worst problem we had, though, was we had completed this first, first we had an early submission to the FDA after 75 patients. We had applied for, at the beginning, we made an application to the FDA for early submission if we meet certain statistical criteria, which we did. Presented that to the FDA, and they said, "Oh, this looks really good. Why don't you keep going get a year's worth of data on these patients?" Okay, that sounds good, because we had seen the first few patients continued to get better with time, which was unheard of in this type of therapy. Well, we go to the FDA. Well, let me step back. We have the IPO. Then we applied for a PMA, which it hung up for a long time. We weren't making any progress getting the reviewer to really address our submission. We have a panel meeting up there, not a panel meeting, but a meeting with the FDA. We bring all our doctors up. At the end of it, the FDA says, "You did everything right." And now this was a FDA reviewer from the drug branch. He says, "You did everything right. It all looks great, except, we're used to having two studies, more patients. Go back and do a double-blind study."
Ugh.
Well, we didn't have although we had gone public, we didn't have enough money to do another long double-blind study. We could keep going for quite a while, but it's like now we've got to go to the survival mode and concentrate only on getting through this next study, which means we're going to have to cut back the engineering staff. We had assembled some really top-notch engineers.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys were really my friends. I had to let some of those guys go because they're their highest paid.
Yeah.
And they weren't going to be able to do anything because we had to do this study for the next few years. There was no more engineering to be done. So that was the lowest part of my of Cyberonics, and the lowest part of my life, I think. Still think back. I wish I had done something different, given them different options, or maybe they could have worked on clinical studies instead of design or something like that. But anyway, that was the low point.
See,
of course, another low point I forgot to mention is in the beginning I had made an agreement with them. They would bring in a CEO at the right time.
Right.
So I had made all this progress, and they said, well, it's time to bring in a new CEO. Well, I didn't like that. I hated that, but I couldn't do much about it. I had agreed to it.
Right.
So that was kind of and then, of course, I never think the new CEO is doing quite right, but I have to follow along with it. But because I had no experience in marketing and sales, for
Right.
sure. That's building markets. We needed somebody for that anyway.
I think the similarity between startups is you go through these massive highs and these massive lows, and it's how you deal with the lows. I think that really tests your mettle and your grit. Can you get through it? And I can't imagine laying off your friends, Reese. And I knew some of those folks. Wow, and it's tough. But one thing is you did it. You brought a product to market, a very difficult and plannable product to market that has literally saved human lives.
Mhm.
So highs and lows, it's just part of what entrepreneurs deal with. So kudos to you. And this leads us to the last question. Any advice for other startup founders?
Well, the first advice is it's a big challenge, and you have to be mentally and realistic about the challenges you're going to be facing, both yourself and your family and your career, because you don't know how long it's going to take to do this. And so you really have to go look at it from a very realistic, hard standpoint. How much is this therapy or this idea going to be worth? Is it going to be worth enough for investors to look at?
Right.
And is it going to fit into what they're looking at? Is it the time frame they're always looking for a payback? What is the time frame for them to get their money back? How are they going to get their money back? Which goes into what kind of investors do you look at? In our case, we need to do a clinical study, high risk, very high risk. So go to venture capitalists. For other things like startup, like you have, you might go to individual investors. It doesn't take as much. You don't have as much capital involved in it.
Right.
Or you could start your own consulting company and bootstrap it yourself. And then you don't have to worry about other investors telling you what to do and things. So it depends on what you're trying to do. But whatever it is, you have to really look at all the aspects, try to study it. What advantages can you provide? What or this therapy provide? Are you improving on something that's already there? Or are you starting something new like we did? What are the risks? What are the legal things? What is the competition? How hard is it going to be to break into market? How are you going to market the product? Is it a concentrated set of customers, or is it a very broad-based set? Are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to get somebody else to? Are you going to have reps do it? What about the technology? How much do you have to develop new technologies, or can you use sort of existing technologies to develop whatever therapy you've got? What is your patent protection? Not only what is your patent protection, what other patents are out there that might prevent you from practicing this? Those are some of the things that you just have to look at all this. How long is it going to take? And then you got to, how much of my time am I going to commit to this? Now, if you're working a full-time job, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
It is. In case, I didn't have a job, so I could do it full-time, but I could not have done it trying to do a full-time job and try to start a company. But then if you say, I quit a company, I'm going to start this idea. Well, what are you going to live on? How much money do you have reserved to keep going? What can you do consulting? You've got to have some money coming in somewhere. Or your family's, or my wife helped, so we could have, she helped some with that. So those are big commitments, and it's very easy. I've got a friend who tried to start a company like that and never got off the ground. Years into this. So it's very easy to kind of get caught up in this, and time goes by, you don't have anything, and Where's your money gone? Your time and your life gone? You haven't got anything. So that's the other side of it. So
amazing. Wow.
It's a great opportunity, and it's the most amazing opportunity in my life. It's fun. It's a fun thing to do. It's a great time to do it.
And there's no guarantee to success. And to recap, you lost your job, which led you to starting Cyberonics. You had great early success with your first 2 patients. You IPO'd, and then you had these huge challenges of having to redo your double-blind study. And then there's a lot of little stories you shared with me that we don't have time to talk about, but major highs and lows. But at the end, you're driven. You had the grit. You made it happen, Reese. And I think I've shared this with you before, but from my experience working for you in Cyberonics was where the seed of Galen was planted. You know, most medical devices aren't connected. Saw that experience, and we're trying to correct that. But you know, it's an honor to call you a friend. Thank you for hiring me. You know, if it wasn't for that, Galen wouldn't be here. But you know, it's this lineage of events, and we have our own stories to tell about some of our highs and lows. But maybe for another day. But Reese, thank you so much. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for helping patients, saving lives through engineering, through electrical engineering. It's a pleasure and it's an honor for me to call you a friend, and you're an inspiration to me.
Well, it's the most important part to me is not only getting the company started, but being able to actually help some people that nothing else in the world helps these people.
Yeah.
So
What you didn't share is the people with epilepsy they failed 3 drugs. They had no other choice, and to either reduce or abort seizures, amazing. So maybe we can have a follow-up, Reese, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Okay.
Bye-bye.